Ryan Roach Knight with Transform Network. Glad to be here. Excited to have another deep dive conversation. And today I am joined by Yaz Mendez Nuñez, co-executive director of Soulforce. The other co-executive director there is Reverend Alba Onofrio. And Soulforce and Transform have had some great collaboration and obviously like similar, vision for faith and justice, and just excited to sit down and have this conversation and get to know you and get to know Soulforce a little bit better and let more people know about the great work that you guys are doing. How are you doing today, Joss?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm excited to be having this conversation with you.
Yeah. So for folks who aren't already familiar, tell us about Soulforce. Tell us what is this great organization that's doing this great work?
Well, Soulforce is nothing without our roots. We were founded 24 years ago in 1998 by a couple of gay men, one of whom is very well known, Reverend Mel White. In particular, his activism in doing the work of calling to account these really strong evangelical leaders for the spiritual violence that they were producing and recreating. And at the heart and the root of Soulforce is our legacy as a direct action organization. And so our beginnings, our foundation, are these groups of people who were called to action by Mel and his partner Gary Nixon, who would be learning from Mel and Gary's email list and calls to action about these various gatherings of evangelical leaders, or these opportunities for people to convene and create nonviolent direct action to call to attention the immense spiritual violence that was being done by these leaders, who are the leaders of the religious right as we know it now. And Soulforce is known and beloved for that kind of work. We were some of the people at the very front of the conversations about the harm that was being done by Jerry Falwell and his now empire. And that was able to evolve into an organization of deeply passionate LGBT people and their allies trying to figure out what kinds of creative interventions we can take to stop spiritual violence and to end the misuse of Christianity against not only LGBTQ people, but other marginalized groups. We started working with activists at Christian college campuses and started taking some of the first public loud interventions connecting what was going on at these Christian colleges and their policies that were discriminatory and violent against their LGBTQ students to the systems that allow for those schools to be able to enact that kind of violence and let that be justified, against these teenagers, these young people who were coming into themselves at these Christian colleges. And so we are famous for our equality rides, where we would take other young people, a bus of 50, 60 young people, and travel across the country hosting nonviolent direct action at these schools, trying to connect to students there, letting them know that they're not alone, that there are people who are thinking about them in their struggle, in their hurt, and who are working to fight against that which is hurting them and harming them. We are known for policy change at almost 100 of those schools. It is really exciting to be able to be part of that legacy. Soulforce has a very long and rich lineage. The heart of Soulforce that continues on 24 years later is this immense passion for problem solving around spiritual violence, understanding what it is and working to eradicate it at all levels, whether it's in the work of working with and against systems of power, to name it and call it out and end those systems that create structural abuse against LGBTQI people, whether it's working with individuals who are working at the denomination level, to push up against religion-based violence and religious abuse, whether it's working with young people at Christian colleges, whether it's working with activists who are secular, but who are finding Christianity in particular to act as an impediment to their justice work. It's very diverse, very varied work. It has taken so many forms. I'm super excited to talk more about some of the programs that we're doing. But the heart of it is understanding that our individual spirits as queer people first, for whom we center our work on queer
Yeah.
people, but all of those who are seeking to be bringers of justice into this world, we are grounded in our faith that justice is possible, that we can create change, and we understand as soul forcers that that change begins with our own spiritual transformation and our own healing from that which has harmed us, and trying to figure out what is it that I can bring in order to make that change at a structural level, and grow out from one's own soul force, our own audacity to believe that another world is possible, right?
Mhm.
So that's the work that we do broadly. We do a bazillion things. Our people do a bazillion things. I'm a huge fan of the organization, enough to be the co-director. It's really exciting work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm excited to dive in more and talk more about what y'all are up to now. But what an interesting like history. Transform Network came about in around 2009. And while some of the founders of it were LGBTQ folks, a lot of us were not. And so it was, uh, I guess, a bigger deal. Um, a lot of us coming out of mainline, but a lot of us coming out of evangelical backgrounds, becoming more progressive. I'm just curious, like LGBTQ queer folks have been doing that, like the groundbreaking work. I don't know why. Like I was familiar with a lot of it as you were talking about it, but it just struck me like here again, queer folks have been doing the hard work, and like allies have been showing up, but later in the game to stand alongside and support when when you guys have broken the ground, you know. Does it feel like there's a strong groundswell of support around LGBT equality and stuff now, or does it feel like we still got a long way to go?
Oh, such a good question. And I think we could just talk about that for the entire
We probably could.
conversation.
We probably could.
I think that what I am seeing is that our LGBT movements broadly have done incredible culture change work in the last 50 years to be able to create structural and legislative and cultural shifts in how we as queer people are received and perceived. And that has benefited the like day-to-day lives of queer and trans people, that more of us can come out of the closets, that our children are more safe, generally speaking, depending on the environment and the geography you're talking about. I will say that one, geography is really important. Soulforce works globally, and
Hmm.
in partnership with a lot of people in a lot of communities in the global South, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean and in Southern and Eastern Africa. And alongside those spaces and the US South, where we focus our US based work, stuff is really hard still, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of things have changed and a lot of things continue to change, but especially as we've seen in the last year or two with the legislative attacks on trans and gender nonconforming people and our children at the school board level, right? That the the culture can shift and then it can shift again, and there's this perpetual work to be done that queer people are at the front of and have been at the front of for a long time. um, and I see more and more that it is, yeah, that work is just really important. I think that what we are really privy to, that I imagine y'all are too, at Transform, is that the culture can change the secular culture of a place can change, but if the religious underpinnings and the spiritual underpinnings of what is understood as morally good doesn't reflect what is also happening in the culture, there's just going to continue to be this choque in Spanish, like this like butting up against each other, right?
Mm,
And I think that that has contributed to a lot of what we are seeing right now in terms of the regression culturally around particularly trans and gender nonconforming people, because mainstream theology hasn't caught up to what the culture is doing. And
right, right.
um, the access, being able to access for, I think, the grand majority of practicing Christians or people who are culturally Christian, being able to access affirming scripture, like a affirming spiritual leadership, places to be able to like to push back against the mainstream narratives about what God, the Bible, creation has to say about LGBTQ people is just such, like, there's not that much mainstream access. And so there's a cultural problem in that I think that queer people need a lot more support around. Also, those of us who are doing this like progressive religious work need a lot more support around, because
Sure.
it's difficult, and it will probably take generations to really like see see incredible change, but it's vital work to do.
Right, right. So more allies always need to be stepping up. But Soulforce, the term it comes from Gandhi, right?
That's right.
Is yeah, Satyagraha. Is that
Yeah,
the? I don't
that's
know if
right.
I
That's
said
the
that right.
concept behind the name. Yeah, Satyagraha.
Yeah,
I think that's how it's pronounced.
yeah. So there's interesting connections there, and like you touched on a little bit the trauma and the healing and mindfulness and all of that stuff that is a part of that doing that justice work. Well, you and Alba and all of the folks involved with Soulforce, like it seems like a amazing group of younger leaders who are rising up to do this work, which is awesome. So before we go back and talk more about kind of what Soulforce is doing today, like how did you get involved in Soulforce? How did you get connected? And
Yeah, I was a young queer person and I met Soulforce when I was 21 years old. Um, I had just graduated from school and I had fallen in love deeply with social justice movements. I was learning about the immigrants' rights movement in my community in Virginia. I was getting involved in that. I was getting involved in legislative work in Richmond, Virginia, where I was coming up. And I knew that regardless of what I had been studying in school, that I wanted to figure out how to plug into that thing. Um, I was young and queer and not particularly interested in religion because I had felt very burned by my Catholic upbringing growing up. And yet, when I met the leadership of Soulforce at that moment in 2014, I knew that I wanted to be in on that. At the same time, that I began working with Soulforce, the Black Lives Matter movement really started growing, with the murder of Mike Brown, and that really deeply impacted me. I found myself enmeshing myself really deeply in community of very young people who were trying to figure out what we did around police accountability in that moment in our local political scene. And I was working at Soulforce, working with students at Christian college campuses at that time, while I was also like spending my not work time in movement. And I found that while I really liked Soulforce on its own and the mission and the kind of work that we were doing, I was so profoundly distraught by the level of despair that I found in my
mm,
local organizing scene as young people. We felt under-resourced, like there wasn't a vision for that what we were asking for felt nearly impossible, right? The
mm,
like deep culture shift, the like the ask for accountability, the ask for like all of the work that we were doing was seated in a campaign, but the underpinning was like the system is stacked against us, and what do we have to be able to like really give to this except our lives, and what happens after we give our lives. And when I turned into Soulforce work, I just found so much hope and so many answers to questions that felt really difficult to ascertain, of like, what is possible if I am focused on the transformation of my own spirit to be solid enough so that I can stay in this work of justice long term, for example, and not burn myself out on on this really intense work. And questions about what does God, spirituality, religion, and specifically Christianity have to do with, you know, some of the work we were doing at Soulforce at that time, I just fell in love with, around understanding that the violence that I was seeing that felt unjust, that I would like, I just was like, I'm looking at all these people watching us do these die-ins in the streets, and they're gawking their heads and they don't know what's going on. And why don't they have empathy for what is
Mm.
happening? And Soulforce had answers for me around the idea of Christian supremacy, and understanding that that Christianity has been weaponized to moralize these injustices, and it keeps us so that we're swimming in this water of spiritual violence, and we don't, and it's hard to shake ourselves out of that. And so I realized that I wanted to dedicate my life to this body of work, to figure out like, how do we make clear what is being moralized and what is unjust, and how do we, like, person to person, work that out so that we're not giving that to the next generation.
Mhm.
So I stayed put. I've been in Soulforce for 8 years.
Wow.
It's an incredible body of work, and I've grown so much alongside it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's awesome. I love this. So I just want to read this. This is from the Soulforce website, Soulforce's theory of change. It says, rests on the idea that we can foster an irresistible movement of people working to end religion-based violence by outfitting our social justice movements with the tools we need to heal our spirits and counteract the vitriol of white Christian supremacy. I think that's a fantastic statement. Really love how you guys have just encapsulated that in that statement. You've used the term spiritual violence a few times. Can you say a little bit more about that, and kind of what some of the work that Soulforce is doing right now around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to pair it with another phrase that we use that you just brought in around white Christian supremacy. So what Soulforce's mission and all of the work that we do is about uncovering where Christianity is being weaponized in service of systems of abusive power, like white supremacy, like patriarchy, like colonization and imperialism. Um, and so what we talk about when we are discussing some of the violent ideologies and theologies, um, the thoughts and ideas that are undergirding all of these systems, is this phrase, white Christian supremacy. It's a set of beliefs that moralizes all of this other violence, right? It is different in form and flavor in every possible way from Christianity itself, the religion, the belief, the faith principles. It's a perversion of that thing, that is
Mm-hmm.
used for political aims, and it gets lodged in ourselves. And so wherever we, especially marginalized people who are receiving the brunt of violence under Christian supremacy, are experiencing those toxic messages, for example. We can talk about what is going on right now with trans and gender nonconforming people, and the messaging that we're experiencing at the hands of white Christian supremacy, that our bodies and our experiences of the world are unnatural, that they defy the natural order and creation of mankind, that we are an abomination, that we are, I won't continue on because it is spiritually violent messaging, right? But
Yeah.
that those those messages create the laws, the policies that harm our beings. And not only does it hurt to receive those messages, but there is a kind of trauma that we experience that needs to be named and understood as what we call spiritual violence, because the language and the culture of this country, of the United States, is based in Christianity. When somebody is using that language, or those faith systems to make a proclamation about what is spiritually true about another person, that wreaks havoc on our systems, because it creates this impediment that is like, there is something in the system, or there's a literal person who is telling me that I am like spiritually contradictory to the like goodness and wellness of the world. And that makes a profound impact on me. We work so directly, we have for the last 24 years worked with LGBT people who primarily just need healing from hearing over and over and over again how, we don't align with that of creation. And that violence it impacts our bodies and our spirits. It impacts our religious wellness and our spiritual wellness. We understand those parts as a really important part of the wellness of a human being. And it is so spiritual violence is all of those messages that ultimately are harmful to one's spiritual self. And whether or not we practice Christianity or identify as Christian ourselves, maybe we identify contrarily, like I'm hostile to religion, I don't want anything to do with any of that Christianity stuff. There is spiritual violence that is still permeating and like sits in our beings as trauma. And that needs to be addressed, whether it's through healing it, even just naming it is a part of what we're doing right now.
Well, I know one of the things that we've collaborated in the past on is a thing called Adult Vacation Bible School. Are you guys still doing that? And what describe it for folks who
Yes, I love Vacation Bible School. And this is something that came out of working with students at Christian college campuses. Our Vacation Bible School, I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with Vacation Bible School, and that was a part of my childhood growing up, is going to church, staying there for the day while my parents worked for a full week, and we did crafts and we colored different coloring pages from like scripture, and like watched VeggieTales or whatever the thing was that is a part of our spiritual formation growing up. It was like playful and fun, but where we also received a lot of our messaging about what was good or not good, and what was Christian or not Christian. And so as a part of creating spaces for us to work on our well-beings, and to heal the spiritual violence that we as queer people experience at the hands of white Christian supremacy, we at Soulforce have like many theological resources that help unpack scripture and theology that are accessible and ready for people to crack open on their own. We have many workshops on Christian supremacy and understanding it. We have a lot of those sorts of spaces, but we wanted to create a play space for people to be able to just like engage and sing and dance and enjoy their time while also working on our internal selves, and like figuring out new messaging around what is good and moral and well within ourselves. And so Soulforce Vacation Bible School, we create space for adults to work with us, and we've done this like online course where we study the wild and wonderful queer nature of creation. There are hundreds of animals who they practice some form of homosexuality or gender diversity that when we're told about the farm animals growing up when we're kids, that's never a part of the narrative. It's like the mommy goose and the daddy goose have a baby goose, and the mommy dad and the mommy cow and the daddy cow, and those sorts of like gender scripts and sexuality scripts and family scripts, they don't fit what is actually true about queer people. And they're also like what is they're not true to what is going on in creation.
Mm.
So we take some of the coolest and funnest stories about animals that align with like that just like break open and explode some of those very heterosexual cisgender myths about the creation, and we explore those. We talk about gay penguins who raise children with each other. We talk about asexual animals who reproduce without the help of other creatures. We talk about animals who, like wolves, for example, who raise their young in a pack of creatures, and some of them never reproduce, but it's a village, it's a pack of wolves who are like rearing some young, and just different family structures, different ways of understanding sex and pleasure, different just alternatives. And we pair that with some of the most interesting gender diverse and sexually diverse stories from scripture. We talk about we offer, for example, the story of David and Jonathan, and like some people believe that this is a love story of
Mm.
these two men. And so what does it mean to understand scripture from that lens? What does that say to you about the stories that you had like and taken in as a young person about the only way to create a family or to have a love relationship? And we sing and we have coloring pages and we do activities together, and it's just a fun and sweet way to be able to do some really important and really hard work on your own spiritual self.
That's awesome. Love it. And you guys have just produced some just amazing resources. I'm just looking on your website, soulforce.org, your whole resource library. And there's a book that's come out in Spanish, and you're working on it, the English translation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Over the last 5 or 6 years, Soulforce has been partnering with activists and people of faith across Latin America and the Caribbean. And through those partnerships, we have been developing curriculum for the last 2 years around understanding spiritual violence and religious abuse through the lens of Latin American feminists. And that's been really exciting work. It has added a lot to all of the work that we do in every language in Soulforce. And yeah, we've been working for the past year, and we just are getting it. We are self-publishing it. It's really exciting. I think the launch moment is happening in late August or early September for our Spanish language audience. But it's a book about 130 pages that helps move readers through a sort of self-propelled journey of understanding what spiritual violence is,
Mm.
having examples of what that looks like for other people, and activities to sort of like to meditate, to reflect, to feel in your body where it is that you're most deeply impacted by the spiritually violent messaging that you may experience in your life. It's been really beautiful. We worked with activists and religious leaders in Costa Rica and in Colombia, and in partnership with people in Mexico to be able to create this body of work that I think applies to a lot of people globally.
Mm.
And so we published that in Spanish, and hopefully by the end of next year, we will be able to adapt that to a US audience. It'll be in English.
That is awesome. And I know one other thing that we've talked about, and excited to announce more soon, but wanting to do an open conversation and having kind of a panel discussion to talk about this campaign that y'all are doing around boarding schools. Can you give us a little teaser or tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Indigenous activists in the United States and in Canada have been working over the last year or so to call to attention a government-funded study and acknowledgement of what happened with Native boarding schools that were developed in partnership between the United States government and the Canadian government, and I think 14 different Christian denominations, their leaderships. And under under that, the legislation that was passed in the 1800s to create those schools, and then the proliferation of those schools for the next 200 years, they were just atrocious abuses that happened to young children, Native children who were taken away from their families, but also Christianized, right? To move themselves away from their native language, their culture, their spiritual traditions. And the Christianization was a very specific understanding that if the if the colonizers of this land were able to strip away the indigeneity of these native people, of their children, that there would be much better success of the government being able to like peacefully seize the land.
Mm,
And that being guised as like a moral quandary for the European people who were coming into the Americas to like to do this for the benefit of Native people is deeply an intergenerational injustice that needs to be addressed, and also something that we need to be talking about for those of us who identify as progressive Christians, or who are just invested in that work, to understand where Christian supremacy was tied into the founding of these here United States. And so we are going to be spending the next couple of months working alongside Indigenous activists, talking about the report that was taken out, talking about what, just doing some education for people. I think that the issue isn't addressed as much as it needs to be right now. And we also are going to be using our own platforms and working alongside our partners platforms like yourselves, to just bring more light to the conversation and connect Indigenous actors and queer Indigenous people into these conversations. So we're really grateful to get to create partnerships with people who are working on this, because that work of Native sovereignty and being able to understand what happens that is at the formation of this country is critical to all of our other social justice movements.
so folks will be able to go on Soulforce social media this month, August, and then there'll be more in October, including an open conversation. Pope Francis was just in Canada offering an apology to the Native people. I mean, that was kind of connected to a lot of this, right? Acknowledging what the Catholic Church's role in this, which was something. But I know a lot of people. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I'm just curious. We'll talk more about it in the panel, but
yeah, I'll for sure leave it to the experts on the panel to talk more about. And there, we are also working on some blog posts to be able to talk about why exactly that visit from Pope Francis to Canada was exactly like you said, right? Like something.
yeah,
But there are,
not enough, but it
yes,
was
not enough
something.
by
Yeah,
any means. I will say that there's the work of being able to recount what happened in history and take responsibility for the actions of others. And then there is the actual part of reparations, that is at once a like economic project that the Catholic Church still needs to take account for as the biggest denomination that was working on these efforts.
yeah.
Um, and also a spiritual accountability, and a spiritual reparations of understanding where is it that these kinds of atrocities are still happening. For example, we are like we are talking about and making connections between what is still happening and what has happened at these boarding schools as an act of conversion therapy, in the same realm of what happens in conversion therapy for LGBTQ people, because the idea is stripping away that which is authentic to one's own self and saying that authenticity is immoral and it
Mm.
goes against the principles of Christianity, and that the closer that one can get to this heterosexual white Christianized American ideal, the closer to God one is. That is still happening to
Mhm.
Native people, to LGBTQI people, to people beyond those communities, right? And so the apology is fine. A lot of people took a lot of issues with the way the Pope was dressed, the way that he spoke. There's also these like bigger systemic issues and spiritual issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'll give a plug for my earlier deep dive conversation with Darren Calhoun about conversion therapy in the LGBTQ community. If folks haven't seen that, haven't heard that, Darren's got a powerful story and is doing good work around that as well. I know Vahisha Hassan would be very sad if I didn't ask you about kind of how you two connected at Highlander. The Highlander Homecoming is coming up. That's for folks who are familiar with Highlander and the Highlander Homecoming. This is a place where a lot of us have come together over the years, and Highlander just, yeah, I would love to hear that story from your perspective, how you and met and connected.
It's hard to remember that we weren't like in the womb together. I love that human so much. We met at Highlander a couple of years ago because she came to one of our vacation Bible school sessions that we did live there. And
Oh, nice.
it was so fun and so lovely. Vahisha is just this incredible force, as are most of the people who come to these gatherings there on the Hill, because it's a space for us as people who are invested in our social justice movements to be able to come and take respite and to share what our strategies are and how we can build together. And so to have a play space where we're healing and all of these like brilliant activists who are doing incredible work to just get to like play and sing and talk about like fish who change gender and be wowed and amazed by new information is just like incredible. And Vahisha totally was the embodiment of that, sort of like the joy of being a learner and a student of the incredible nature of creation and how we can't fit creation and God into a singular box. Is just like, you're my people and I want to be connected to Transform Network so that we can figure out what it is that we can do together, because that the spiritual connection is just like the most important part.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that Soulforce that you're excited about, that Soulforce is doing, and you want to make sure people are aware of and can get plugged into if there's ways for them to do that?
Absolutely. One of the things we are most well known for at this exact moment is our theological resources, which I talked a little bit about. These resources they're short booklets that we create in partnership with activists, theologians, teachers, faith leaders around the world. And they're meant to address some of the hardest scriptural concerns that people have about LGBTQI people. We also are expanding and growing into being able to support feminists in reproductive justice movement,
Mm,
with that same sort of, with like similar scriptural and theological concerns. And so we have what we call our Spirit Resource Library. It's all online. You can download the digital things for free, um, and read these resources and sort of explore. But we've got a library of, I think, 8 resources now. Almost all of them are translated into Spanish. And when we can, we have activist partners and faith group partners in many countries, particularly in, like I was saying, we partner with folks in Eastern and Southern Africa. And they have been working whenever we can offer the financial support to them,
mm,
to translate the resources into their local languages. So for example, our resource on Sodom and Gomorrah is in English, Spanish, Lugandan, and in Zulu. And those two African languages are because our partners were like, we need this resource because we're just getting clobbered with Sodom and Gomorrah, but I need it in this particular language because this is my church's language, for example.
Mm, mm.
So we love getting to partner with people in that way. We make the resources in collaboration with people who we partner with around the world because we want them to like reflect the kinds of messages that are globally harming us as queer and trans people. And I'm really excited about getting to there's more demand for the resources to be translated
Oh
than
yeah.
there is resources for us to be able to like support that happening. And so I'm I'm just excited to get the word out about those resources. I hope that people will go and look through them and see if they are healing or helpful for you yourself as you are working through anything around your own spiritual formation. And if anybody has the resources to be able to support the actual translation of resources, it is something that our partners are really excited about. And
That's awesome.
so yeah, I love that work. And we're always creating new resources. And so if that's something that's of interest to people, we'd love to have you on our email list so that you get to know as soon as we're working on a new one.
Folks can go on soulforce.org and donate and help support that translation work. That's so exciting, so important. That's great work. And it's just I feel like Soulforce and Transform, like we're similar in a lot of ways, that we
Yeah.
do a lot of different things. Um and it's just the like obviously there's just so much alignment. So love you guys, love all the work that you're doing, and excited to talk more about, and so stay tuned folks, there's more coming in collaboration. Josh, thanks so much for taking time today to take a deep dive and talk about Soulforce with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for talking with me about Soulforce, Stephen. It's a pleasure. I love this work. And I love the work that y'all do, and we need more of us. And so
Yeah,
I'm grateful to be connected and for doing just being in it together as organizations and as people.
absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome. All right. Until next time.